أنا عندي 106 سنين 106 سنين الحمد لله.
Hello, and welcome to Meet Us on the Abraham Path. I'm Anisa Mehdi, Executive Director of the Abraham Path Initiative. API is a nonprofit organization dedicated to building bridges of global connection in this part of the world, the Middle East, Southwest Asia, a region sadly known better for conflict and hostility than for the hospitality of the people who live there and its spectacular walking trails. Abraham Path Initiative has helped build more than 2,000 miles of walking trails throughout Southwest Asia to encourage walking tourism as a tool for economic development and to foster friendships across the challenging divides of our times. Nowadays, we are also building pathways in cyberspace. And so you are here from Detroit and Dusseldorf, Erbil, Geneva, London, Paris, Boston, Sao Paulo, and Los Angeles. Welcome, everyone. I'm here from New Jersey, United States, the land where the Lenni Lenape people used to live. Today, we are heading to Southwest and Central Asia, where other people also used to live in great civilizations and great cities like Nineveh, Persepolis, Petra, Palmyra, Ur, Babylon, Greek, Roman, and Sasanian cities. And some of those ancient cities are still alive today: Mecca, Damascus, Jerusalem. But what about those that have not survived the trial of time? Those that remain as remnants of their former selves, the places we call archaeological sites or ruins. Joining us today from Geneva to shed light on protecting and preserving our shared cultural history is Valéry Freland, Executive Director of the Alif Foundation. Since 2018, Alif has been protecting heritage to build peace. Welcome, Valerie.
Thank you for your invitation, Anisa. I'm very pleased to be with you tonight.
We look forward to hearing about Alif's work, what is being saved, thanks to the efforts of international organizations such as yours, and also what may be lost if we don't step in. But first, let's start with you. You've had quite a career in diplomacy at the French Ministry for Europe and Foreign Affairs. You were an advisor to the French Ministry of Culture and Communication. And you were the Consul General of France in Boston, one of my favorite cities, before you moved on to Alif. So I want to know, what's it like to be at the helm of such an important mission, the preservation of human heritage at this moment in our history?
So actually, first of all, I must say that I've always been working in the field of cultural diplomacy, since my very first position at the cultural attaché of the French embassy in Saudi Arabia in 1993, And so, I've, as you mentioned, I've also worked with the French Minister of Culture, Frédéric Mitterrand, and I was also in charge of culture in Tunisia during the Tunisian Revolution. So I like this field. And when I was in Boston, I must say that I work a lot on culture and, of course, education, as you can imagine, in Boston, including with Wellesley College, actually. But when I saw the job ad, regarding the position at Alif, the executive director position at Alif, I decided to apply because that's cultural heritage protection is definitely something I like, something that is very moving for me. And so I wanted to be part of this adventure for two reasons: because of cultural heritage protection, and also because, I wanted to go out of my, I would say, comfort zone. I wanted to try something new. And I know that it's very the American spirit, I would say. And I wanted to try something new, which is being the executive director of a private foundation, because Alif is a private foundation, but also a very new and very young international organization. So it was very challenging. And that's the reason why I decided to join Alif.
Now, you may get into this in a moment in your presentation, but I am curious about the relevance of making history, saving our history, our built heritage. I have some of my own thoughts. I loved in 1976, I'm dating myself here, when I went to visit the building that is behind you in your scene now, the Ctesiphon in Iraq. But why are we bothering?
So actually, cultural heritage protection is important, including this Arch of Ctesiphon. And I will go to Iraq in 15 days, actually, with my team, and we'll go to Ctesiphon. It's important for a couple of reasons. At Alif, we have the conviction that we can contribute to build peace through cultural heritage protection. And that's exactly what you do with your organization, with your NGO. We do think that it can put people together. It can contribute to reconciliation. It can also contribute to social and economic development. It's very important in the countries where we intervene.
Is that because you're hiring local people and
sure. We as much as possible, we try to work with local NGOs. It's very complicated, so I must confess that we also work with a lot of international organizations, but all of them, they try to work with local people, they try to employ local workers and so on. It's a key criteria for us. But more than that, I do think that cultural heritage protection and cultural heritage is part of the human soul. You know, it's part of us.
How hard is it to convince the public that that's the case?
I must confess that it's very difficult sometimes. Okay. It's very difficult. And you need to convince it if you want to raise funds, actually. Some people are very sensitive to the humanity of cultural heritage protection. Others are more sensitive to the social and economic dimension. So you have to manage the different arguments.
Who owns cultural heritage? Like the Ctesiphon, is that owned by the Iraqi people, by its government?
It belongs to everyone to some extent. As a Ctesiphon, it belongs to the Iraqi authorities. One point, sometimes for a foundation like us, and I'm sure that it's the case for many other international organizations, it's quite difficult to finance the rehabilitation of private houses. For instance, that's one of the issues we face in Beirut, because we work in Beirut, we finance a lot of projects regarding the consequences of the blast of last August. But we face a very difficult issue, which is the fact that all of the historic houses are private houses. So how can we contribute to the financing of the rehabilitation of private houses? That's an issue for us.
We're going to get a presentation on the work of Alif in just a moment from Valéry Freland. So I want you to put your questions for him in the Q&A, which you'll see on the control panel. Are you ready?
Let's try. Alif is the only global fund exclusively dedicated to the protection of cultural heritage in conflict and post-conflict areas. Of course, there are a lot of international organizations, there are a lot of NGOs working in this field, but we are the only one exclusively dedicated to these areas. So why did we create Alif in 2017? So you all remember what happened in 2001, in March 2001 in Afghanistan. So top left of your screen. So the destruction of the Bamiyan Buddha. We also remember what happened in Palmyra with the destruction of the Balshamin temple in 2015. We also know that some museums were destroyed in Yemen, like the Dama Museum, which is below. So it showed that it's a very, very key issue worldwide, and it's still a current issue. So we created Alif in 2017 because we do think, and that's our deep conviction at Alif, that cultural heritage protection can contribute to peace building. For the past 20 years, so we have been facing the massive destruction of cultural heritage in conflict areas, Afghanistan, Iraq, Mali, Syria. And what is interesting is that there has been for, I would say, 30 or 40 years, an instrumentalization of cultural heritage. Cultural heritage can be, of course, a collateral of conflicts. Moreover, with the development of terrorism, cultural heritage became a target of war because it's probably the most tangible expression of our identities, and also a weapon of war, given, for instance, the impact of the videos disseminated by terrorist groups like Daesh on Atra, Mosul, and so on. And what we see today, it is that cultural heritage protection is still an ongoing issue because an increasing number of conflicts continue to hold cultural heritage hostage, including recently, and we think about what happens in Caucasus or in the Horn of Africa. So at the same time, cultural heritage can be a means of economic and social development. So it has an impact on capacity building, on job creation, on sustainable development through traditional materials in particular, and also a way for reconciliation and peace building. So because of, we also created Alif because in 2016, 2017, we needed a new instrument, an agile instrument. And so the financial needs were immense. For instance, in Mosul, the liberation and the Daesh destruction damaged 640 historic sites in the old city of Mosul. So the evaluation of the rehabilitation is about 1 billion. And what happened, and after the blast in Beirut in last August, 630 historic houses were damaged. And so the rehabilitation was evaluated about 300 and 500 million USD. There is also a need to fight against looting and illicit trafficking of cultural goods, which contributes to the financing of terrorism, organized crime, and money laundering. We don't have so many data on this field, but it's evaluated between 3 and 15 billion USD, the revenue of this looting and illicit trafficking. So it appeared in 2016, 2019 that after what happened in the Middle East and in the Sahel region, there was a need for a new mechanisms to be able to raise public and private funds and implement them flexibly. And so that's why we, at the initiative of France and the Emirates, we decided to create Alif in Geneva. So we were created in March 2017, and since October 2018, after the setting up of the Secretariat, we have been able to finance more than 100 projects for 35 million USD in 22 countries. So how is Alif's approach innovative? To some extent, Alif is a unique model. First of all, I already told you it's the only global fund exclusively dedicated to the protection of cultural heritage in conflict and post-conflict areas. But what is interesting with Alif, it is that it is both a private foundation under Swiss law, which gives us a lot of agility, and an international organization based in Geneva with the same immunities and privileges as the United Nations in Geneva, thanks to the headquarters agreement that we signed with Switzerland in October 2017. And so Alif, the reference of Alif is the Global Fund to fight AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria. We have the same statute. We don't have the same capital, I must confess, but we have the same statute. Alif is also a public-private partnership. So we have 13 donors, including 7 member states, plus 4 foundations, plus Monaco, plus Switzerland, which is our host country. We are both a financial instrument, we are a grant-making foundation, but also we provide a strong scientific expertise through our different committees and our network of 200 international experts. And what is also one of our main features is the fact that we are managed like a startup. I must say that Alif, it's only 10 people in Geneva. So it's a very small team, but very dynamic and very committed. So if you look at our capital, you will see that France is our first donor with 30 million USD. Second, Saudi Arabia, 20, and the Emirates, 15, Kuwait, 5, and so on. But we also have China, Morocco, Luxembourg, And we have some private donors, the Andrew Mellon Foundation, Thomas S. Kaplan with our chair, and Jean-Claude Gandur with a Swiss philanthropist. So what is the Alif way? I would say that there are three mottos that can define us. First, our main objective is to protect cultural heritage to build peace. And that's exactly, I would say, what, for instance, Irina Bokova, the former Director General of UNESCO, had in mind when she supported the creation of Alif in 2016, 2017. And when she said, I deeply believe that culture and heritage alone can't bring peace, but without respect for heritage and culture, there is no lasting peace. Our second motto is action, action, action. We try to focus on concrete projects in the field. So that means that most of the time, what we try to finance projects which include concrete action in the ground, training session, awareness raising, and community involvement. And the third motto would be, and it's very close to what you said, Anisa, regarding your action. Behind cultural heritage, there are women and men. The project needs to demonstrate significance and value for local population and communities, and they must have a local and sustainable social and economic impact. So to some extent with Alif, we are creating a new form of multilateralism, which is very concrete, very agile, very responsive, and we call it the multilateralism of projects. So what do we do? So how do we work? So Alif finances projects of cultural heritage protection or rehabilitation in conflict or post-conflict areas. So we have a large view of our mission and of the countries where we intervene. So once again, we support projects in 22 countries today, mostly in the Sahel region, in Africa, and in the Middle East, but also in Asia and in South America. We support projects before conflict, for instance, some preventive measures to protect a museum, to protect a collection, as we did, for instance, in Abidjan regarding the Museum of Civilization of Abidjan in 2019-2020. We support also projects during a conflict, like we do, for instance, today in Yemen, in northeast Syria, and so on. And of course, we finance rehabilitation of sites, museums, historic houses and buildings, and so on. So we deal with tangible and intangible, movable and immovable cultural heritage. And we have two procedures. First, we launch every year a call for project. And so the last one is closed now. And so we are able to select around 30 projects a year through these calls. And throughout the year, we can also finance emergency measures under 75,000 USD. So our criteria are relevance, quality, feasibility, and sustainability. And of course, our selection process integrates several scientific and technical steps. So our map is not far from yours, Anisa. If you look at the map on your screen. So today, so we have financed more than 100 projects in 22 countries, in 5 fields, and for a total amount of 35 million USD committed. The main countries where we intervene are Iraq. In Iraq, we have 30 projects for almost 10 million USD. Afghanistan, where I was a couple of weeks ago, 12 projects for more than 6 million USD, but also Mali, Sudan, Yemen, and some other countries. Let me give you 2 examples of our agility. Last year, which was an exceptional year, so Beirut, August 2020 and not 2021. So we launched 2 action plans. The first one was to help small organizations in vulnerable countries involved in the field of cultural heritage protection to overcome the COVID-19 pandemic. And so with a very small amount of money, we financed 100 small organizations in 35 countries with a global budget of 2 million USD. For instance, we finance museum, archaeological sites, and so on to develop protection measures against the COVID-19 and so on. And we also launched just after the blast in Beirut in August 2020, we launched a second action plan to help our dear friends from Lebanon to overcome the massive destruction of the historic houses and historic areas of downtown Beirut. And so now we have been able to finance almost 20 projects for more than 2.5 million USD. So, for instance, we help the Sursock Museum, the National Museum of Beirut, the Archaeological Museum. We also finance the stabilization of 30 historic houses and monuments in downtown Beirut. We finance the rehabilitation of 2 libraries and 2 cathedrals. So our main challenges so far are the following. So what difficulties do we face today? So first of all, when you deal with cultural heritage, you deal with political issues. And more specifically, the main issue for us is how to reconcile the protection of heritage with the principle of sovereignty. Example in Syria, we don't work in Syria except in the northeast of Syria for political reasons. And we work and we finance projects on Syria, about the magnificent cultural heritage of Syria, but we don't work with the Syrian authorities. We also working in conflict or post-conflict areas, but I'm sure that you all know that is very challenging because you have to face a very evolving situation. So security, fragmented societies, weak institutions, humanitarian relief, sometimes corruption, and so on. So it's very challenging to work in conflict and post-conflict areas. There's also another challenge for us that actually, because there were not so much money in this field, there are not so many international and local actors able to rehabilitate a cultural heritage. So we have to find and select international actors, and also to contribute to the development of capacity building locally. And there's also another issue, which is that we need to break down barriers between sectors. You know, I'm a diplomat, and I was quite surprised to see that, you know, people works in silo. So we need to work and to break down barriers between cultural heritage sector, defense, diplomacy, development aid, civil society. That means, for instance, that we need to work with NGOs, which are not specialized in cultural heritage protection, but we match them with cultural institutions, and they can develop a program and projects in cultural heritage protection and rehabilitation. So in the coming weeks, the challenges that we will have to face are the following. First, there is, of course, the necessity to regularly replenish our capital. That is not an endowment. So, and it's key for us, of course. So we'll have to develop a strategy to attract new member states and to attract new private donors. So what I suggest to my members is that I think it would be good to have a donor conference. We had one in 2017 at the Louvre Museum, where we raised 80 million USD. So I think that in the current context, it would be good to have a second one to raise a new cycle of funds, just like our friends from the Global Funds Against AIDS or the World Partnership for Education in Washington and so on. So we need to do that to make Alif sustainable. There is also another issue that Alif is a young organization, so we need to find our place in a fragmented and to some extent a competitive international landscape. And more precisely, we need to develop a complementarity with UNESCO. Of course, we don't know what if we will have to face in a long-term period the COVID-19 pandemic, and it is true that it's challenging for those who work in difficult countries like us. And last but not least, our action focus on conflict, but there is a strong link between climate change and conflict. And so maybe once we'll have to think about how should we also work in areas which are facing a strong climate change. So let me just finish with some projects. So in Afghanistan, I was in Afghanistan a month ago, where I met President Ashraf Ghani and the Minister of Culture and so on. And we had a very, very fascinating mission in Afghanistan. We went to all the places where we wanted to go, all the sites where we wanted to go. And so more particularly, we financed a huge project, which is our biggest one, actually, which is the rehabilitation of the Ballet Citadel, which is in the downtown of Kabul. And the Ballet Citadel is very old, more than 2,000 years. And the project, which is carried on by the Aga Khan Trust for Culture, is to transform this military site on an archaeological and historic site. And what is interesting, and it showed that investing in cultural heritage protection can create jobs, it will create more than 1,000 jobs. There is also another project which is completed, and which is very, very interesting, which is the rehabilitation of the Marbena Monastery in Iraq, which is in the south of Mosul, southeast of Mosul. It was carried out by French NGO, which is a Fraternité en Iraq, and a French architect. But what is interesting with this project is that to some extent it contributed to the reconciliation in the area, because it's a place of pilgrimages of Christians, of course, but also Muslim, Sunni Muslims, and also Yazidi. And the project was carried out by a French architect, an Iraqi archaeologist, and some Sunni workers, local workers. And so, if you look at our video on this project on our website, you will see that it created links, relationships between all these actors, between local and public authorities, and between different representatives of religions. One of our main projects in Iraq is the rehabilitation of the Mosul Museum, which is a project which associated a lot of great institutions, very well-known institution. Of course, the State Board of Antiquities and Heritage and the Ministry of Culture, Tourism and Antiquities of Iraq, but also the Mosul Museum, the Louvre Museum, the Smithsonian Institution, and now the World Monuments Fund. And this project is funded by and coordinated by Alif. So it's a very ambitious project, maybe a project of between 10 and 15 million USD. So I will go to Mosul in 15 days, so I will see where we stand. But actually, the stabilization of the building has been done. Some training stations have been provided by the Louvre Museum and the Smithsonian. And now we face two main challenges, which is the restoration of the building itself and the restoration of the collection, which is very complicated in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. We also work with our dear friends from Penn University on the rehabilitation of the Tutunji House in Mosul, which is a very successful project. It goes very well. I think that they have made more than 50% of the rehabilitation of this patrimonial house, very famous in Mosul. And we have a lot of projects with Penn University, which is a key player in the field of cultural heritage protection worldwide, and especially in Iraq. And once again, we work with Penn University and some other actors like Econem, a French company involved in three-dimension images. We work on the stabilization of the Arch of Ctesiphon, which is, as you can see, an extraordinary monument in the south of Baghdad, built in the 6th century and part of the Sasanian palace complex. So last October, the Minister of Culture of Iraq called me, telling me, please help us. The Arch of Ctesiphon is collapsing. And it is true that it collapsed twice or three times since last September, last October. And so we try to be as responsive as possible. First, we finance a first survey, and then we finance for more than 700,000 USD the stabilization of the arch, which is very complicated because we need, and the operator, Penn University, needs to create a special scaffolding for to sustain the arch. And so I will go to Ctesiphon mid-June. I don't know if it will be ready, but I know that maybe I will be able to meet with the architects which are involved in the construction of the scaffolding. And last example, which is Atra, which is a famous archaeological site in the west of Iraq, which was damaged by Daesh in 2014, 2015. And once again, we decided to finance first a first aid intervention by a team of Iraqi and Italian archaeologists. And so they went to Atra last February, and at that time it was quite dangerous. It's because it's a very sensitive area, very dangerous area. They were very courageous, and we financed their first survey, their first intervention, and now we decided to support this team to develop a project to rehabilitate the on-site mission house and to restore the damaged sculptures and architectural elements of one of the temples. Just one last word about our partnership with Abraham Pass Initiative, which is on intangible heritage. We don't do so many projects on intangible heritage for a couple of reasons. Maybe because at the very beginning, when you launch a small international organization like Alif, you need to show concrete things. And sometimes maybe it's difficult to show concrete results when you work with intangible heritage. But we are very pleased to have this partnership with Abraham Pass Initiative, which deal with recipes, embroidery and songs from the northwest of Iraq and from all the minorities of this area. But I'm sure that Anisa will be pleased to elaborate on this project.
We have a number of questions that have come for you, Valerie. But before, let me just address the Intangible Heritage Project that we are working on with the Abraham Path Initiative, which is to look at or to study some tiny piece of people's culture. For example, in the image you showed, there's a lady holding up a dress that she had embroidered. This is a woman from the small town of Karakosh, which the Pope visited in the spring of this year. And when they had to flee, this is outside Mosul, when they had to flee the oncoming Daesh invasion, what they did was start to embroider the streets of their city into the dresses that they wore, so they could remember the churches and they could remember what a wedding looked like and what the musicians wore. Some of these dresses are intricately descriptive, like a library of their town. And so we hope to help them create a digital library that retains the memories of the town as it was, and with the authentic embroidery traditions that have been around for a long time. And we're going to be working with other minority communities in northern Iraq, the Nineveh Plains, and in the Kurdistan region as well. So we're very grateful to you for your partnership in this effort.
Thank you.
We have in our audience Mohammed Shaheen, who is from Mosul and was very interested to hear about the projects that you have going there, asking, is there any work on a future prevention plan? He says, I'm from Mosul, what is my expected role? So how can people be helpful, particularly if they're from these areas of imperiled heritage?
Two points. First of all, Alif doesn't finance so far big plan of conservation of a city or of something like this. We do something with the World Monuments Fund in Taiz in Yemen, which is more or less the same, which is a conservation plan for the city, but it's not a conservation plan against against war or something like this. So we are not fully involved like this. I think it's maybe more the responsibility of national authorities, and we could help them actually, and maybe also UNESCO. It's because it's we intervene more on concrete, I would say, tangible actions on the ground. You know, that's more our that's more the Alif way. The second point, very difficult question regarding how they could help us, what they could do. Mosul is for us. Mosul is a very complicated city for a couple of reasons. For security reasons. When you go there, you always need to go with a strong security, and also because it's quite difficult to identify NGOs. We need local NGOs involved in the field of cultural heritage protection in Mosul, and we would be very pleased to work with them, maybe to provide some capacity building, training session, and so on, because we need this kind of NGOs, trustful NGOs in Mosul. So I'm going to Mosul. So if this person lives in Mosul, I would be very pleased to meet with him in Mosul in 15 days.
And we can help you connect, Mohammed,
Sure.
with Valéry Freland, if you're there and you can help. There's another question about Iraq here, which is, does Alif work to preserve Jewish heritage in Iraq? There's a very, very proud Jewish history in Iraq, from Babylon all the way up north.
There is, that's right. You all know that it's a very sensitive issue. We must be frank, it's a very sensitive issue, the Jewish cultural heritage in Mosul, in Iraq. It is a strong part of the Iraqi nation. So we work on some projects, but step by step, because we need to create a consensus on this project. And we are in contact with different academics and so on this field. And we are ready to finance initiatives. We work on some project, but we need to work with the Iraqi authorities too.
Here's a question from one of our board members, Lionel Savage. He asks, is our Western world attention to cultural heritage actually putting it at risk as terrorist organizations see the heritage as symbols?
Let me just thank Lionel, who is one of our donors. So thank you very much, Lionel, for being part of the adventure. It is a very difficult question. Maybe, but at the same time, what we try to finance and what we try to do is to finance better protection of museum, of collections. So, of course, when you work on cultural heritage, you show that it's important for you, you show that it's important for countries like ours, but we also contribute to the concrete protection. So it would be much more difficult to damage, to destroy artifacts, to loot artifacts, and so on. It's difficult, but I do think that we need to involve more funds in the concrete protections on the ground, and it would be a way to fight against looting, illicit trafficking, damage, and so on.
There would be people guarding those sites that you're working on.
It's another issue. That's the reason why we always try to work with local actors, even through international partners, because you can't have a sustainable preservation of local sites, cultural heritage in Iraq and so on, without the strong commitment of local population, local communities. So you're right, it's key. And that's the reason why that's one of our objectives for each project, to have discussion with local communities, to involve them in order to be able to protect them in a long-term period.
In tandem with that, Robert Rosenberg asks, when you disperse funds, you have a responsibility to ensure it goes to trusted and efficient recipients. How do you vet and monitor the recipients of your funds?
It's a key question in the countries where we work. So we have due diligence procedures for each project, okay, and for each operator. So they have to fulfill all the conditions. We try to identify what are the well-known and what are the reputation of the different operators and applicants. And sometimes, like we did in Beirut, we match 2 or 3 different organizations, you know, from abroad, from Beirut, and they have to work together. And it's a way to organize a control of themselves, you know. And so that's exactly what we did in Beirut. And I hope it worked.
Hmm. Yusuf Al-Dafe asks, what qualifies as cultural heritage? How do local communities and the shop owners, in this case Mosul, how do they reach out to restore their markets, and what do people do?
Yes, yeah, no, it's very, of course, it's very difficult to define cultural heritage. For us, what we have in mind, so once again, we deal with tangible and intangible, movable and immovable. For instance, we finance the restoration of some shrine from Yazidi in the north of Iraq. Most of these temples were not very old. You know, they are not so old. They were built in the 70s or something like this, but they are so symbolic and so important for these communities that we decided to finance their rehabilitation.
We have a question from Alix Hopkins in Maine, who asks, how public do you need or choose to be? How public is Alif's work? Is there a danger that too much publicity will only fuel those who want to hold antiquities hostage?
No, you are right. That's the reason why some of our projects are on our website. Some others are not. We don't publicize everything because sometimes you need to work under the radar, and and you need to be discreet. That's right, for sure. So that's, for instance, that's what we did in Northeast Syria. That's what we do sometime in other countries. And yes, we mustn't publicize everything if we want to really protect cultural heritage.
Sure. And then comes the question of, once you've succeeded and once tourism has been restored, how do tourists negatively impact the cultural heritage?
Just one point is that we work in countries where there are not so many tourists, actually. Unfortunately, Iraq, despite its remarkable cultural heritage, Northeast Syria, Afghanistan. When I was in Afghanistan, there is no more tourists in Afghanistan. So I can't say that I had to face this kind of issue so far, but it is true that when we rehabilitate, when we contribute to the rehabilitation of a site, we need to think about the use of this site and the impact that more tourists could have on this site. That's definitely an issue, and sometimes it's part of the reflection on it's included in the project. Yes.
Well, certainly after the COVID threat is over, we at Abraham Path Initiative are very hopeful that tourism will return and people will get to walk in these extraordinarily beautiful areas and get to know the people
Sure.
who live along the trails, and also participate in the economic development.
Sure, but I must say that it's quite challenging, because that's definitely not areas where there are a lot of tourists. But in the future.
Talk
We need
about
to-
off the beaten path, right? This is so far off the beaten path, but work such as yours and hopefully such as ours may draw attention, may spotlight these areas. Can Alif support any projects that aim to upskill young researchers or develop their capacity in terms of nominating sites for the UNESCO list?
We decided with the board of Alif for the first year that we will not finance too many research projects because there are a lot of private foundations which are more involved in this field. So we decided to finance concrete action on the ground. That's definitely our way. But we could finance some research, some survey, for instance, in the field of looting and illicit trafficking in conflict areas, because we need data in this field. No, that's definitely part of our identity to focus on concrete actions. But sometimes you need to have some academics, experts and of course always experts in bigger project of concrete rehabilitation.
I think one thing that you're doing, and we hope to do this with our Alif project as well, is to engage local researchers who are experts in the field of, in our case, intangible heritage, and in your case, archaeological rehabilitation.
Of course. No, that's once again, of course, we need to work with local actors, local workers, local researchers, but for a rehabilitation or protection project, not really for surveys and on specific
right.
topic.
You want to get right into the get your hands dirty, right in the mud of the place, right?
Exactly, because we had the feeling that it's much easier to do surveys, to provide training sessions and so on, than to rehabilitate and to protect concretely on the ground. It's very challenging. Working in Gao in Mali, it's very challenging. Working in Mosul, it's challenging. So that's the reason that sometimes we have the feeling that people work on training session, on surveys, and so on. But we also need to be on the ground. That's our ambition.
We are coming to the top of our hour. This has gone by very quickly, and there are a number of questions that I apologize to our guests that we are not able to address to you, but I can send them on to you so you can know.
Sure. I will try to answer all the questions.
Valéry Freland, I want to express our deep gratitude to you for the time you've taken to be with us, for the information you've shared, and for the great work that you're leading and empowering in terms of cultural heritage preservation on behalf of all of us. Thanks to everyone for attending. We'll see you in a month for a webinar on the power of walking with David Baum.
Afternoon.